Ask any aspiring adventurer, disgruntled dragons have the best loot. And the secret to ransacking their riches is to get in, grab an expensive artifact, and then get back out before being burned to a crisp. And that is your objective in Clank, a deck-building game of action and avarice introduced in 2016 by Direwolf Digital and Renegade Game Studios. There's now nearly a dozen different games available in the Clank series, and it can be a little bit overwhelming to try and discern the differences between each of the various versions. Heck, Clank here is one of my favorite games, and it still even makes my head spin. Then again, that could be from the expired potato salad that I ate. So, I thought that I would use my remaining few minutes left to live to review the Clank line and hopefully help you find the version that is the best fit. This is Pair of Dice Paradise's Clank Buyer's Guide. The Clank series can be divided into three major categories. The original Clank, with a fantasy theme, Clank In Space, which introduces a sci-fi setting, and Clank Legacy, which will evolve into a unique experience while also incorporating the characters from Acquisition Incorporated, an online series of podcasts, live shows, and comics. We're going to take a look at each of the different games and expansions in this series, excluding the various promo cards that are also available for the game, because there's a lot of them, and I want to finish this video in time to get my stomach pumped before I completely succumb to rancid mayonnaise poisoning. The first game published in the Clank line was Clank, a deck-building adventure. Now, this edition introduces the core concepts that appear in each subsequent version of the game. For example, every player has their own deck, which they will customize as the game progresses. Now, most cards will generate resources, such as skill, which is used to acquire new cards, swords, which are used to fight monsters that infest the dungeon, and boots, which are used to move around the board. No matter which cards the players add to their deck, the objective remains the same. Retrieve an artifact and then escape the dungeon with it, picking up as many additional points as possible along the way. But escape may be easier said than done, because every noise that they make, referred to as clank, draws the attention of the dragon, who also lives in the dungeon, and each artifact stolen further increases its rage. Players will then need to balance acquiring plunder with making their way back out of the labyrinth safely, because the only way to enjoy your ill-gotten treasure is to make it out of the dungeon depths, alive with it to enjoy. The second entry in the Clank deck-building adventure line is the Sunken Treasures expansion. Now this adds 2 new maps to explore, a dedicated board for the marketplace, additional dungeon cards, and introduces environmental challenges such as flooded rooms, which require players to periodically come up for air as they swim through them, or else they take damage. And what's neat about this is this was a simple way to add a little twist to a player's timing as they explore the dungeon. Sunken Treasures also introduces effects that can be triggered by discarding cards from your hand, and treasure rooms which award gold to players every single time they enter them. The next year introduced another expansion in the adventure line, The Mummy's Curse, in which untold riches await inside the Pyramids of the Ancients, but these Pyramids of the Ancients are pretty well protected. For example, there is an undying mummy guardian who spreads vile curses to those who attempt to rob its tomb. That type of stuff. Oh, and also, of course, the treasure has also attracted a dragon, because sure, why not? This dragon operates the same as in previous versions of Clank, but the mummy randomly wanders through 4 sectors of the dungeon, causing chaos wherever it goes. And in addition to this curse-casting mummy and the thematically curious dragon, this version also introduces additional cards and reward tokens, and updates one of the game's core rules about obtaining artifacts. In the original rules, artifacts are acquired once a player enters the room that contains it, just like any other token on the board. However, this edition revises this rule to state that the players can spend a free action during their turn to take an artifact from the room that they're in, and this revision becomes the standard for all subsequent versions of Clank. Next was the Gold and Silk expansion, which includes a set of additional boards featuring a gold mine that leads to the lair of the Spider Queen, which becomes infested with monsters as you explore it. Because of course it does. Some of the additional quirks that you'll find in this version are gold veins throughout the map, which can be mined using skill points, elevators, which allow players to pay gold to quickly shuttle through the mine, webbed rooms and tokens that slow your progress but award additional resources and points at the end of the game, and a room housing a cache of treasures that the Spider Queen has collected and arranged neatly in a convenient circle for all your plundering needs. Now, as of the time of this recording, the final expansion in the Clank Adventures line is the Temple of the Ape Lords, which takes players deep into the jungle where the fabled dragonless Temple of the Ape Lords is said to reside. Now, this version of the game ratchets up the complexity a little bit by adding a set collection mechanism in which players can collect various ape erratus tokens, their pun, not mine, which earn more and more points for having more and more of each type of token at the end of the game. But then things go really bananas, that pun was mine, with the introduction of rotating passageways, which will reorient themselves throughout the course of the game, changing the paths available to players and possibly sealing off rooms in a dead end. Additionally, this version supports a mini 2-game campaign mode in which scores and tokens accumulated when playing on one side of the board are carried over and applied to a second game played on the other side. It's another neat little twist in a version of Clank that is just packed full of them. In 2017, Clank In Space, this time featuring a sci-fi setting, was released and introduced the most substantial revisions to the Clank lineup up to that point. Clank In Space is, comparatively, a bit more complex than Clank Adventures, perhaps making this version a better fit for players who have already had a little bit of experience with the game. Now, the core concepts are still present. Players build a customized deck of cards throughout the course of the game, which will be used to move through the spaceship, attack things, acquire new cards, and, of course, make noise to attract the attention of the boss monster, who this time is played by the evil Lord Erraticus, because dragons have not yet developed warp drive technology. This version of the game includes a modular board, which allows several different board configurations, various factions of the cards that you will accumulate, introducing synergies that can be taken advantage of by comboing certain cards together, data port checkpoints that players will need to hack in order to progress deeper into the ship, power crystals, which can be used to boost certain effects, teleporters, a hyperlift, and a brand new wrinkle in getting off the ship alive in the form of single-use escape pods, which are first come, first serve. Clank In Space retains enough ties to the original to feel familiar, but I think adds enough new elements to keep things interesting for seasoned players as well. In 2018, the first expansion in the Clank In Space series was released, Apocalypse. Now in this version, small pockets of resistance continue to oppose the drastically impolite Lord Erraticus, but now the evil cyborg hatches wicked schemes designed to ruthlessly obliterate the players, thoroughly dampening their afternoon. In addition to 35 adventure cards and 2 new double-sided modules for the game board, this edition also introduces evil schemes which are enacted by Lord Erraticus. These schemes are powered by the black Clank cubes that are pulled out from the bag. In previous versions of the game, these black cubes were simply set aside when drawn out of the bag, but now, when pulled from the pouch, they are applied to the current scheme, each cube advancing it through its various stages. These cubes can also be manipulated by the players and by certain cards, which are played in order to earn more points and power-ups as the game progresses. Meanwhile, in another sector of the galaxy, if there's a cybernetic enhancement that's worth having, then the ruthless Commander Prion has it on Cyber Station 11. This expansion in the Clank In Space line adds an entirely new board that the modules from Clank In Space can be plugged into, and 40 more adventure cards, including the introduction of Cyberware, a new card type that stays on the table in front of the one who plays it if a power crystal is paid when playing it, which allows its effect to trigger again and again on each one of that player's subsequent turns. The third category of games in the Clank line are based on Acquisitions Inc, a podcast following the misadventures of a Dungeons & Dragons campaign, which eventually expanded to include live shows and comics. And in this version of the game, players found their own franchise of the legendary adventuring company Acquisitions Inc, and then shepherded their fledgling treasure hunters towards immortal corporate glory over the course of a campaign. The game's board, cards, and rulebook evolve as the game progresses, ultimately creating a unique custom adventure. The Acquisitions Incorporated version of Clank introduces many elements common to other Legacy games. Secret new game-altering cards, stickers and rules that are revealed as certain events unfold, and additional new features to Clank such as new modes of transport across the map in the form of coaches that can be hired, new movement options such as a canoe, contracts to fill, player boards to provide continuity between game sessions, plastic minis for the player characters, and a difference in how the end game is played out after players begin to escape the dungeon. Overall, this version of Clank introduces a lot of modifications to the core system, which are amplified by this legacy element. And then there's two small character packs that have been released which are compatible with both Clank Adventures and the Acquisitions Incorporated Legacy version of the game. The Upper Management Pack contains 4 Acquisitions Incorporated characters, represented by minis, character boards, and 4 different custom 10-card starting decks for each of those characters. Similarly, the C-Team Pack introduces 4 more characters with minis, character boards, and their own custom 10-card starting decks as well. Now, while both of these character packs are compatible with the original Clank Adventures line and the Acquisitions Incorporated Legacy system, it's recommended that players wait until after they have completed the Legacy campaign before incorporating these characters into the Acquisitions Incorporated Legacy version of the game. Otherwise, using these characters during the Legacy campaign could result in a few mild narrative inconsistencies. And there we have it, a look at the 11 titles that are available in the Clank series as of the time of this recording. Now, I hope that this guide has helped clarify what's available for Clank and what makes it such a neat game. Until next time, I've been Chaz Marler from Pair of Dice Paradise. Take care. Add a little bit of divine intervention to your dice rolls with either this Dice or Devil Angel pin strapped to your lapel, lanyard, backpack, or other pinnable surface. Roll with grace and confidence with either one of these 1-inch enamel pins by your side.